What's the path from the mean streets of New Jersey to a Tomcat squadron to being a NASA astronaut with multiple shuttle missions and over a year as the commander of the International Space Station? Well, let's talk to a guy I flew with a bunch of times when we were in the Puking Dogs together, Scott Kelly. So I'm wearing my Puking Dog swag, courtesy of our former squadron mate, Chili McDonald. He sent this to me. He's in the swag business in some fashion now. So you and I were crewed together, and I'll have to look at my logbook. In fact, let me grab my logbook. So January of 92, it's pretty much exclusively you and me.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm showing this to the camera here. Yeah, so January of 92, we're flying a lot.
You know, I have three very distinct memories in that squadron, and two of them actually involve you. One of them is probably like the funniest thing that I've ever seen in my life. And there was one night, I don't know if you remember this, but we landed, at night on the ship, and we were going to hot switch. And I guess your viewers might know what that is. And basically, you chain the airplane down, you keep one of the engines running. The Rio would get out first and get on deck, and then the next Rio would jump in, and then the pilot would get out, and then the pilot would jump in, and then they close the canopy, start the left engine, and then you take the airplane flying again. And it's dark on the flight deck, it's loud, and I'm sitting there waiting for you to get out. And you get up on the ladder, and your understanding was the guy at the base of the ladder was one of the other JOs. Like, it was the Rio that you were swapping out with. I don't know who you thought it was. And you're standing on the ladder, and he's standing there with his back to the airplane, kind of in your way, so you can't get down. And you put your foot on his helmet, and you shove him out of the way by pushing his head. And then the guy turns around, and he is in your face, and you're in his face, but you think this is like Lieutenant JG Nobody, and it turns out it was Snake, the CO.
It was the skipper.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I could see the moment when you realized that it wasn't who you thought it was, and I lost it.
I in my mind's eye, I remember this exact moment. Night hop. We're just ready for mid-rats. I was probably grumpy. And, just like, I just want to get out of the airplane and get our flight gear off and get downstairs and debrief and whatever. Right. So to your point, this person who I cannot see, nor can I see whoever their name is on their helmet or whatever, is just like parked at the base of the ladder, facing the wrong way. Right. Yeah. So I, like you said, I climbed down the ladder.
Yeah.
And I put my foot on their helmet and then gave it a little push.
I think it was more than a little.
It was just a little like, right?
It's kind of more like a shove.
And I remember Snake wheeling around and giving me this like WTF, like reaming me.
Like, your career is over, look.
Yeah, one of them, right? And I kind of said, hey, you were in the way, sir. I didn't know it was you. A million apologies. And this moved on. Right. And so then you hot switched with him, and and we were done. But I remember that. I do remember that now that you mention it. Yeah. Okay. So that's one. What's the other one?
Well, the other one was, there was one, it was like a night in a barrel night that we all have occasionally. And we were in the, I guess it's the Gulf of Oman, off the coast of Oman and Yemen there. And we were flying around at night. And at one point you say it was kind of like getting close to us coming back to the ship. And the weather was supposed to be great. And I remember you saying, hey, this is weird. It looks like there's land between us and the ship. So logically, it made no sense. I was like, what? Are you sure? And you go, yeah, it looks like there's land on I guess the pulse radar. And it turned out it was a sandstorm. And that was probably one of the worst nights where, I ever had, where we couldn't get aboard. Because we couldn't see mostly. And, when you can't see, it's kind of hard to land, or makes it harder. It's hard enough just in general when it's dark with no horizon, but add, had poor visibility into that really dark, no horizon night. And, we bolted a couple times. We got waved off a couple times. We, went to the tanker. I was having trouble tanking for whatever reason. It was a lot of turbulence, hard to see. It was hard to even rendezvous on the tanker. We were blue water ops. I mean, I guess technically we could have landed somewhere, but, the way the ship operates sometimes, even though there might be a runway where you could land on land, you don't consider it a divert because of the countries involved. So, and I remember kind of coming back to the ship again and, eventually, winding up being trick or treat, and which means you either land or you got to do something else. And sometimes that something else is eject. And we happen to be able to get on board. But I don't know if you recall that night or that.
I do. And I also will tell the viewers that you recount this episode in your book, Endurance. So I was reminded of it when I read your book. And I remember looking at the DDD, which is my pulse scope. And, Tomcat fans will know the difference between the DDD and the TID. And so I'm looking at the pulse presentation. And as you say, I see this black, like solid black, that could only be explained as a landmass. So I relate to you as kind of an Annie M moment, like, and we called you Grace back in those. I'm like, Grace, we've got to get back to the ship. This is, and I think I estimated it was a sandstorm. And we didn't quite make it, and it turned out to be a night in the barrel.
Yeah.
And this is why we make the big bucks. These happen, as you say, trick or treat is like get aboard, or like you say, other options, including your signal is Zulu, which means eject next to the ship. We'll pick you up. Not a good option. But I think we had a good, by that time we'd flown together a bunch.
Yeah.
And so, I knew your tendencies on the ball. The other thing I remember, I don't know if you remember this, I'm sure you do, but at night, because in the F-14B, the pilot had ACLS, which is automatic carrier landing system needles. So you have, azimuth and glide slope indications, and the idea is to keep those things on and on. I had a repeater of your needles in my cockpit with the new AUG-9 tape that we had. I forget whether tape 114 or something, where the Rio got needles, which was a huge situational awareness builder for me, because before then I didn't have needles. But I remember your technique was, okay, so I'd look around your head to see, okay, I see the lens is on, but obviously me seeing the ball isn't important. You need to see the ball. And so you'd say, I got the ball. So get to 3/4 mile, call the ball, we verify, yeah, I got the ball. So I'd say, dog 103, Tomcat ball 6.3.
Yeah.
Roger ball. And then you would say, okay, the way your technique was, you're like, okay, I'm going to fly needles to half a mile. And then you say half a mile, and I'm going to come out and I'm going to fly the ball. Right? Do you remember that?
No.
Okay. I remember very distinctly that was your ball flying technique. And the analogy I've used on the channel before is ball flying is kind of like golf swing, sort of swing thoughts. And you listen to two pilots talk about, use the tack end needle and this, and then use this and keep your scan going like this. Because you can say empirically it's meatball lineup angle of attack. Okay, I got it. But within those three realities lives a million different, things. So again, I remember very distinctly that you would, we'd call the ball and you'd fly needles to half mile. And then what I would owe you is half mile. And then you would come out. And this is only at night. This isn't in the daytime. Right. And that worked for you. Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
I remember lineup being my biggest challenge. And, once I became a test pilot in the Tomcat, I just understood it more by just understanding more about the flying qualities of the airplane. And I think, keep it staying inside on the needles, especially for lineup versus glide slope, was important for me for whatever reason, because once I learned more about the airplane by going to test pilot school and then flying at Pax River, that airplane had such such poor like directional stability because you're using spoilers. When you want to go, turn left on the Tomcat, so the way it turns is not using ailerons. It doesn't have any. So the spoilers come up, and then because of that, you get this drag, which pulls the nose this way. And because I had such poor directional stability, it would then swing back this way. So you're trying to do this, and all of a sudden, you can be looking at the left side of the airplane when you're lined up right, or vice versa. And then, of course, your viewers know the other reason lineup is challenging in any airplane on the ship is because your runway is moving away from you to the right all the time, if you're making your own wind across the deck. So.
On that note, let's transition to your TPS into VX-23 and digital flight control system. So we've talked to Rowdy Yates about his time in TPS. So the audience knows the rigors of test pilot school itself. Not easy to get into, not easy to get through. A lot of academics, very hard academics to flying, and then you learn how to write reports and so forth and so on. So let's get right to your time with the DFCS system and put a finer point on what you were just talking about, learning about the F-14.
Yeah. So that was an interesting situation because I show up, I'd graduated from test pilot school, brand new test pilot, and I get assigned to, what we used to call the Strike Aircraft Test Directorate at the time. Now it's patches the same, but I think he said it's VX-23, I guess. We didn't call it that when I was there. So I show up there, and there's there's a few Tomcat pilots, and there's this program called the Digital Flight Control System. And we were going to fix two of the main problems of the F-14. One is it was really hard to land on the ship because of the directional stability of the airplane, and that directional axis just had problems. So it made lineup real difficult. And for the A version of the Tomcat with the old engines, you were historically underpowered, and engines would take a while to spool up. So now you're really fighting two problems. But we could fix one of those with the lineup problem by kind of overlaying a digital flight control system over the analog system, is how we would describe it in simple terms. And the airplane also had a propensity to get into a flat spin. And both of these issues killed a lot of people. So I show up there, I'm assigned to this DFCS program, and I'm the fifth pilot, and we are going to have 4 pilots fly the airplane during the flight test program. The main pilot was this guy, Kurt Schrader, who was not in the Navy. He was the most senior Grumman test pilot. The other Grumman test pilot was Tom Cavanaugh, and then it was Rob Niewohner and Len Hamilton. And, it was really, really slow going because, there was just not enough, pressure to get this done because, we were short on funds at the time. So this seemed like a flight test program that was going absolutely nowhere and was never going to be put in the airplane. So Kurt, he retires. Eventually, Rob Niewohner wound up going to the Naval Academy to teach. I think right from there, actually. Len Hamilton left. I don't know where he wound up going, but pretty soon it was me, the guy that had, probably without a doubt, the least flight test experience of anybody, and Tom Cavanaugh, the most experienced Grumman test pilot at the time. So it didn't seem like we were going to fly anytime soon, if at all. And then what happened was Carroll, who was a flight school classmate of mine, got killed around the ship, and it got a lot of attention. And it was, it was a real tragedy, and it got so much attention that the chief of naval operations at the time, Admiral Borda, decided to put the resources behind getting this done. So, we started gearing up for the first flight test of that airplane, and we're going through there was before you fly, it was a flight test safety meeting. I forget the exact terminology. This was a long time ago, where the whole flight test team basically goes in and briefs the squadron CO on what we're going to do in that first flight. And the guy was Kevin Thomas, KT was the squadron CO, A7 F-18 guy. And at the end of the meeting, he asked a lot of great questions that I can recall, like, any test pilot CO would. And we thought we were done. And the last question he says, he goes, by the way, who's going to fly the first flight of this airplane? And everyone looks at Tom Cavanaugh like, duh, it's going to be him. Not, Lieutenant hasn't been here for very long. And KT says, he goes, Tom, how many hours do you have this year in the Tomcat? I think Tom said, I don't know, like, it was some really low number, like 5 or 10. And he says, hey, you, new guy, how many do you have? And I think I said, I don't know, like 150 or 200. Like, it was like 10 times what Tom had. And he goes, you're flying the first flight. And then everyone closes their books. Everyone's like shocked. We walk out of the conference room, and I remember Paul Canigliaro, one of my best buddies, flight test engineer. He was kind of like, the guy in with Chuck Yeager with the Beemans in The Right Stuff. He was I forget the guy's name in The Right Stuff with the Beeman.
Ridley.
Yeah, he was my Ridley flight test engineer, and he's like, holy shit, this is awesome.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And then it was interesting because, a week or so later, we're gearing up for the first flight, and we're doing the day before, and we're doing, checking out the flight control system, engines on, test. And I run the trim button. The airplane's supposed to be ready to go, right? I'm checking out the trim, the longitudinal trim, and I run the trim button forward, and the stick goes the opposite direction of what it's supposed to be. We have I thought at the time, if this is like flight software, this is really, really bad. We had what could have potentially been a fatal accident on the first flight. And I said something to the effect is, man, this isn't good.
It's a bad start.
Now, it turns out it was just some, one of the maintenance guys just reversed,
Looked it up backwards.
And we were able to fix it pretty easily. And, took off. Me and this guy, Smoke Manick, the Rio, Bill Manick, flew the first flight of the DFCS airplane, and, a bunch of subsequent flights. Including, later, the departure flight tests. I never went to the ship with it. I had left prior to that, but I was involved in a lot of the departure testing, which was pretty exciting. Getting the Tomcat up to a pretty high yaw rate, not putting it in a flat spin. We didn't really need to do that, and that becomes kind of problematic because you got to have a parachute on the thing to stop the yaw, and it's much more involved. But we did we got to do some interesting tests. And then when that thing got to the fleet, it was great. I mean, I don't know if they ever had, you may know, I don't know if they ever had another accident.
They didn't. They didn't.
Yeah.
And I've said this a number of times on the channel. That's the irony of the airplane at the end of its life. It was more lethal and safer than ever before. It's too bad we didn't think of this in 1974 instead of 1994. But in any case, obviously good work for the balance of the life of the airplane. It still had another 12 years of fleet service after that. At the same time, are you applying to the space program at this point, or how did that happen?
Well, interestingly, one day I was just sitting in my office, and I asked Len Hamilton, who was one of the top performers there. I think he was, graduated very high in his class, probably at the Naval Academy, and was probably a likely, guy to at least be very competitive. And he was working on a bunch of stuff one day, and I said, "Hey, what is that?" Big pile of papers, and he says, "Well, that's my astronaut application." And I said, "Oh, when does that due?" And he said, "I don't know, a few days, something." And I thought to myself, kind of like I did with TPS, like when I applied to test pilot school, I applied to it not with the intention of getting in, because I figured, I still had time on my orders in the dogs, but I thought, well, let me apply when I don't think I have enough experience. At least I'll, know, how to fill out the application. They will have seen my name, know I'm interested in it. But like with test pilot school, I got selected. And then, so when I saw what Len was doing, I thought, I'm going to do the same thing that I did for TPS. So I, filled out as brief as an application as I could, sent it down to NASA, thinking I would never get an interview, for a number of reasons. One is, I thought at the time, and it's, and it is true that a lot of astronauts go to really good colleges. And, I went to, a good college, but it wasn't, the Naval Academy or Harvard or MIT or Stanford. I didn't have a master's degree. I said, I'm going to fill it out anyway. And then, lo and behold, they wind up interviewing my brother, Mark, who, he had a kind of a different path into the Navy as I did. We were both bad students, like in middle school, and then like over the summer, something happened, and he became like a straight A student, and I still, just kind of struggled. I asked him a few years ago, "Hey, what happened there?" And he said, "You don't remember, like right before high school, or Dad sat us down and said, you guys like really stink at school, so we're going to just start thinking about a vocational education for the two of you." And I said, "No, I don't remember that at all." Probably only because there was a squirrel running outside the window. Had it not been for that squirrel, I'm pretty sure I would have went to Harvard. By the way, I actually helped teach a class at Harvard Business School yesterday. So I never went to Harvard, but I actually taught there, at least for about 10 minutes.
There's a huge lesson in life for the viewers.
Yeah. But so, I send in my one pager and or two or whatever it was, and really short application. I don't remember exactly. And my brother gets an interview. Like I said, his path was much different. Kind of expected maybe he would. And then, he went down there. I guess he did well. The interesting thing about the astronaut selection is when you go to NASA, they kind of consider you qualified for the job. You've been, your experience has been vetted both on paper and with phone calls to your leadership. They kind of know who you are. And so once you get there, it's more like, I wouldn't describe it as a popularity contest, but it's more like, hey, who are the people that have the right skills to get along and work well as a team and have the leadership skills? And these are things you can kind of sort of demonstrate in a week that you're there a little bit, but not completely, because sometimes they make mistakes. I mean, sometimes we pick the wrong people. But I think, they probably looked at my brother and said, we kind of like this guy, and there's this other guy that seems similar. Let's bring him down. And I think it kind of helped the two of us in that they were able to spend, 2 weeks with two different people instead of 1 week with one person, but two people that are kind of very similar in personality and background. And, somehow they, with all the talented people out there, the people that interviewed, the people that never got an interview, I'm sure there many of them were more talented than me. Just the stars aligned. And in May of 1996, Dave Leesma, Navy guy, Navy captain, head of flight crew ops, calls me up and he says, "Hey, Scott, it's Dave Leesma from NASA. How would you like to come and fly for NASA?" And I said, "Wow." I said, "Fly what?" Because they have a lot of different things to fly, some of them being the space shuttle. And he said, "The space shuttle." And I said, "Absolutely." And it was one of the most exciting phone call of my life, I would say.
No doubt. So obviously there was a PR hook with getting twins into the program at the same time. And then there was a scientific element to that. Yeah. Which we'll talk about as we talk about your ISS mission.
Yeah. I remember this guy, Dwayne Ross, who had led the selection committee for, from the Apollo days, once they announced who the, 1996 astronaut class was, some reporters would call up and they said, "Hey, do you realize you selected two identical twins?" And he said, "We didn't select two identical twins. We selected two very accomplished, Navy test pilots for the job."
You guys, it's no secret, you're identical twins. And by identical, I mean, you and I flew together a bunch of times. We were squadron mates. I was talking to Mark at the O Club at Pax River for about 20 minutes, thinking I was talking to you. And finally he goes, "I'm Mark." I'm like, "No, I did not know you were Mark. I thought you were Scott." So he thought that was kind of funny.
What the best part about having an identical twin is, though? Maybe the only good part?
I'm sure there's a million social situations where that comes in handy, but what's the best part?
It's just the spare organs, really.
Yes, that could ultimately come in handy. So space program, you get your first mission. What was that?
So my first flight was Hubble Space Telescope repair mission. Hubble was spinning out of control at the time. We called it an emergency repair mission, but I really kind of think it was more like a science emergency, because an emergency sounds like there's people you need to rescue, and this was rescuing this incredible telescope.
So that was STS which?
103.
Okay.
Yeah. We launched December 1999, right before Y2K. We actually had to come home early because NASA was worried that if we were in space over the New Year's, space shuttle computers were going to divide by zero, and we were going to, I don't know, maybe go through a wormhole, end up on the other side of the galaxy or something. So we had to come home early.
Okay.
And they assigned me in probably 2003 to fly STS-118, which was an assembly flight to the space station. Actually, they assigned us in 2002, and then February 1st, 2003 was the Columbia accident, which lost 7 of my colleagues, 3 of which were my astronaut classmates, all Navy officers. Dave Brown, Navy flight surgeon, also a Navy pilot, flew the A6, but was also a Navy flight surgeon. Laurel Clark, who was a Navy diving medical officer, also a physician, and Willie McCool, who was a Navy test pilot, who we were at PAX together for a little bit of time. And then that really slowed things down for all of us. And it wasn't until 2007 that I wound up flying as my second shuttle flight as the commander to the International Space Station.
So there's a memorial to Willie McCool on the Naval Academy golf course that I see on a regular basis. It's right next to the green for number 14. And so Willie was a cross-country runner. And the cross-country course winds through the Naval Academy golf course. And the airplane came apart, the shuttle came apart 16 minutes to touchdown. And so this memorial is at the 16-minute mark on the average run to the finish line. And so it says 16 minutes to home. It gives me chills even just saying this. So I always make it a point to go by that memorial between the 14th green and the 15th tee box.
In the astronaut office, we had this, it was a picture it was a big picture, like kind of like this big, that would hang on the wall. And what it was a picture frame, and then it was just black. It was just a black picture frame. And it was for the Navy pilot in the office that had the most recent night trap. And Willie had that in his office on February 1st, 2003. He had the most recent night trap in the astronaut office.
So obviously that major tragedy affects everything in the wake of that. In fact, there is a picture of you and Mark doing the look for wreckage in the wilds of Texas.
Yeah.
So what did this do to the culture of NASA? Obviously, a lot of charges about the shuttles getting old. This affects everybody's perception of because Americans are like, oh yeah, rockets go up, they come down, shuttles fly. It's automatic. And then something like this happens, you're like, oh, okay. So what did this do?
Well, a bunch of things. One, certainly it delayed the schedule. Eventually it caused us to retire the space shuttle early. The accident investigation found that, NASA was basically, kind of, it was kind of a similar situation that we had with Challenger, and that, groupthink, and when you have, your leadership not being open to listening to the experts, or interesting, there's a sign on the wall in this place we call the sports bar at the Johnson Space Center, because it has all these TVs on it, and it was made after the Columbia accident to have real important technical meetings, but they had all these TV screens, to put slides and presentations up there, and so we called it the sports bar. It kind of looked like a sports bar when you walk into it, but it had all these sayings on the wall, and one of them was, "None of us is as dumb as all of us," meaning that at times you could get this group think going where certainly the corollary can also be true, but knowing that or the opposite is true, that there's strength in numbers, but there's also the risk of just the psychology of like the mob. You get all moving in one direction. It's kind of hard to slow it down, and that was really a failure of management and leadership to listen to the experts on what we felt was a serious problem, which was the foam coming off the external tank and putting holes in the bottom of the space shuttle. I actually have a space shuttle tile up there. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, that we had a piece of foam fall off, even after the accident and all the mitigation steps we put in, and still put this hole in the bottom that went right down to the aluminum skin of the shuttle.
This happened after Columbia?
Yeah, on my flight when I was the commander of 118. So yeah, and then when I got back from that flight, I kind of got into the groove of now going into the space station training flow to be the commander of a space station flight, and that culminated with me launching in 2010, October 2010, and I landed in March of 2011 in a Russian Soyuz in Kazakhstan in an incredible snowstorm. And then when I got back from that flight, that's when NASA started talking with our Russian partners about flying 2 people into space for a year, an astronaut and a cosmonaut. And, initially I wasn't that interested, and I didn't quite say no to it. Eventually I started warming up to the idea a little bit because, 6 months in space, 6 months is a long time, right? Spend 6 months on Ike.
Yeah.
Long time.
That's a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. And we could go out on the flight deck. We could go into Dubai and play golf. We could go to the Hilton Beach Club. We went there a few times, right?
Yes.
Fly off the ship. When you're on that space station,
that's it.
Yeah, you're there for the duration. And so when they started talking about us having someone spend a year in space, I let it know that I would, sort of be interested. Eventually I kind of warmed up to the idea a little bit more. But before they decided who was going to do it, they were also looking for a new chief of the astronaut office, and they interviewed a few people for that job, including myself. And at the very last question I was asked in the interview by Janet Kavandi, who was an astronaut, and she was head of what's called Flight Crew Ops Directorate. So she's like the wing commander, and the chief of the astronaut office is the squadron commander below below the wing commander. And the last question she asked me was, so if it was up to you and you could either, be the chief of the astronaut office or fly in space for a year, which would you choose? And I said, oh, absolutely. I would much rather be the chief of the astronaut office. And then like a week later, they gave that job to somebody else and assigned me to fly in space for a year. So I guess I have a history of not wanting to do things and then going to do them. But in the end, it works out for the better, actually. Yeah.
So how did you get to the space station that time? Was it another Soyuz mission?
Yeah. Both times it was a Soyuz, and The first time I flew on the Soyuz was, interestingly enough, had a brand new digital flight control system in it, which was pretty cool. Not like the Tomcat, but
So did you have to learn Russian? Was that part of the deal?
you were supposed to learn Russian. I tried really hard. I could get by, but I never learned it like, anywhere close to being,
So did they
conversation.
speak English?
They generally speak English better than we speak Russian for a few reasons. One, it's an easier transition according to linguists. The second reason is a lot of them take it in high school. They take English in high school, so they've had exposure to it. They're also exposed to it culturally in their society with movies, TV shows, that kind of stuff. And they have a really important reason to learn English even outside of the space program. And that is, if anyone in the audience who's traveled internationally knows that if you can speak English, you can kind of get by in most places. So they had a really big incentive to learn it for that reason, in addition to it being part of their job. So but I could get by in Moscow, but I wasn't going to have a conversation with a Russian that was any more advanced than, where do you live? What do you want to eat? I could order a beer. I could ask for where
Pass the vodka.
Yeah, or vodka, of course.
Right.
But we do speak Russian in the Soyuz, but it was kind of technical Russian. So if you're not in the Soyuz, it's pretty useless.
So you launched when? When was the launch for
Yeah.
this one?
Yeah, my last flight, we launched in March of 2015, towards the end of the month, and we landed in the beginning of the month of March 2016, nearly a year later.
So did you know at launch it was going to be that long?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do the viewers like? The name of this episode is Everything You Didn't Know About Being an Astronaut. So people have seen the video of you zorching back and forth in a gorilla suit, which I guess you stowed away on the way out up there. Was already there, or where did that gorilla suit come from?
My brother, I was on the phone with him one day towards the end of my flight, and he goes, well, maybe it wasn't at the end. It was probably in the middle because, So he goes, I'm sending you a gorilla suit. I go, why? He goes, because there's never been a gorilla in space. So they can, they send us, you can get like, people can send you stuff like care packages, right? And this is described as, Mark Kelly, now Senator Mark Kelly, smuggles gorilla suit to brother in space. He didn't smuggle anything. He gave it to NASA. They certified it to fly as part of my, care package. And they actually used it as, padding. They used a lot of this care package stuff as padding for, hardware. So instead of flying a piece of foam to cushion something, you fly a gorilla suit. And but the first one blew up on a SpaceX, and and I didn't really even give it much thought. I didn't care, right? I didn't even ask for it, right? I was more concerned with the $100 million piece of hardware that was on the SpaceX. And I get him on the phone, and he goes, "I'm sending you another gorilla suit." And it was like towards the end of the flight, I thought, one reason I did it was, just to show like the human side of space flight, lighten things up. I had been there for almost a year at this point, but I thought to myself, even as an astronaut, sometimes you'll go to a school and talk to kids, and despite, what we have to say, you would think every kid would be interested to see an astronaut talk about something, right? Well, sometimes there are kids like me that sit in the back of the room and they're looking at the squirrels, and nothing can get their attention except for a gorilla
suit.
Face.
Yeah.
You cannot look away from a gorilla.
No, you can't.
Face. So.
No, it's just the footage of that is.
And I'll tease this for the first time publicly. Never mention this. And that gorilla suit just kind of went viral like last week.
It did.
Yeah, like 9 million views. I have more gorilla suit videos in the vault, and they will come out at the appropriate moment.
Well, we can't wait for that. And I followed you via your Twitter page during your year in space.
Mhm.
And sometimes you just had cool photos, and sometimes you had sort of, here's what I'm doing today. And sometimes you had sort of, I guess you'd get in kind of a pensive mood, and you'd, staring down at the big blue pill, you'd be like, hey, can't we all just get along kind of stuff and all of that. So in general, what was a day in your life like? Are you
Yeah.
doing experiments? How did you work out? What was your food? Was it Tang and other kinds of freeze dried stuff?
Yeah.
How did you keep up with your significant other? How did all of this
Yeah.
go?
One of the challenges of being in space for a long time is when you go to sleep, you're at work. When you wake up, you're still at work. Uh, it's all around you. You can't get away from it. It's very busy. There's a lot to do on board. Your time is very valuable. You do have some free time that you can do things like, chase your crew members around in a gorilla suit on a weekend. But, generally you're working pretty hard from the time you get up, which I would generally get up about 30 minutes before I had to do anything. It's kind of like I still do that at home. Like if I have something I have to do, I set my alarm like 30 minutes before I either have to walk out the door or do something. And so our days are basically filled with, doing experiments. And some of these experiments, you kind of feel like you're the scientist. Other times it's just like an experiment in a box. I mean, you're turning a switch and for all the thing could be making pancakes or something. But sometimes, you're actually, using the scientific principle to make observations on things. And when I was there were, 400 different scientific experiments going on. So I think about a third of our time is spent on science. A third of our time is spent, just keeping kind of like the general housekeeping stuff of the space station. And a third of the time is fixing the hardware that breaks, doing spacewalks to repair stuff. You do a lot of exercise on board because if you don't, in the microgravity environment, bad things happen to our physiology, loss of bone and muscle mass. Despite all the exercise I did, my heart still lost 25% of its mass. My wife, like Amika likes to say, well, good thing I started with a big heart. So
That is very sweet.
yeah,
But that's how Amika rolls. So how many spacewalks did you wind up doing?
I did 3 on the last flight. I didn't do any on my last flight. I never did one before that, which
And how long? What was your longest one
it was
outside of the?
close to 8 hours, which is a long time.
Yeah. So what's that like? Do you have a sense of hurtling through the cosmos? Because we've seen the movies with Sandra Bullock and all this kind of thing. What was that experience like?
It is the most challenging, physically and emotionally challenging thing I've ever done because, it's physically challenging because of the way the suit's designed. So even though you don't weigh anything, the suit still has mass. It's very stiff. You expend more, your VO2 exchange rate of oxygen is more than if you ran a marathon. It can be hot, it could be cold. Your hands get so fatigued. Sometimes you can barely even move your fingers, but you still have to continue to work. And then you recognize you're in this vacuum in space on the outside of a space station, flying around at, 17,500 miles an hour. And despite all the smart people on the ground and the advice they can give you, they can only give you advice, even the people inside the space station. And the only person that you can rely on is your crewmate who's out there with you and yourself. And that's just very emotionally draining and taxing. After my first space flight, I get back inside and we were kind of get out of the suits. It's like a 14-hour day, 15-hour day where you are just 100% focused at all time, physically drained and exhausted. And I can remember I was passing Kjell Lindgren, who I did that first spacewalk with, like NASA crewmate. When they took our helmets off and we're still in the suits and we're like looking at each other, was looking at our face like, wow, that was crazy. I mean, it's just insane experience.
Well, so what's like one or two things that people would be surprised about life on the space station or something that's just really like normal that maybe you wouldn't think would happen up there. Like obviously you sleep like Velcro to one of the bulkheads. What's that like?
Yeah, you
You know,
sleep in a
did you
sleeping
sleep
bag.
well? Do you sleep well up there?
We evolved sleeping with Earth. People get those weighted blankets for a reason. We like pressure on us.
Yes,
Why
yes.
people buy those things. And so, in some ways, you can be more comfortable now. Like if you have shoulder pain, you might not have it in space, but you're floating. And not only are you floating, your blood's floating inside you. You're like, terminally, congested because you have more fluid in your head. It could be loud, it could be hot, it could be cold. Your back might hurt because it's, your back's expanded. On the Hubble flight with your eyes closed, you see a lot of these cosmic ray flashes, which is, cosmic rays hitting your retina, also going through your brain at the same time, radiation. So that can be distracting. So, I never found that sleeping in space was more comfortable. I much prefer to sleep in a bed with a pillow. One interesting thing about it that people might not realize is you're fall. The reason you float in space is not because you're away from the Earth. It's not a gravity equation where the distance causes you to be at microgravity. You're experiencing basically the same gravity from that perspective as we do on Earth. The reason it's microgravity is because you're falling around the Earth. You're in free fall. The spaceship's in free fall, and that's why you're floating. And when I would go to sleep, after a while, I was able to figure out how to convince myself to make myself feel like I was falling. And I could just propel myself with my eyes closed and the lights out in my sleeping bag just a little bit. And of course, I would stop, but I would still have this falling sensation that I could let continue for an hour if I wanted to. And that was kind of fun to feel like you're just perpetually in free fall, which is you actually are.
That seems like no way to get any sleep. So it's not like, what we used to say on cruises, if you sleep 12 hours a day,
cruise is only
half as long, right? So you didn't have enough quality time to be able to do a JO thing. I mean, you're actually busy. Plus you're being monitored. It would be like if Snake was chasing us all around the O3 level. Like, what are you doing now? What are you doing now? Right? That's not quite the level of scrutiny we had.
Remember the other sleep saying we had?
Sleep 8 hours a day, and whenever you get at night is gravy.
I've never heard that one, but it was sleep till you're hungry, eat till you're tired.
Exactly. We walked that walk on that cruise. So you get back. The official stat in terms of days on the station was how many total days?
On that last flight, it was 340. My whole flight time was 520 throughout 4 flights. My first flight was 7 days or 8 days. Yeah, 7 days. 7 days. Like 13 or 14 was my second flight. 154 days, and then 340. And if you graph this, it's some smart guy told me, oh, that's a second order polynomial. So if I was to fly a 5th flight, it almost goes asymptotic. It would be like well over 5 years. I would have had to have gone to Mars and stayed there for a while. So that's why I decided to retire.
So do you have your top 3? Do you have the record? What in terms of the number of days in space?
Yeah, I currently have the U.S. record or I would say really technically it's the non-Russian record. U.S. or any other non-Russian astronauts or non-Russian cosmonauts for the record for the most days in space in one mission continuously. Soon to be broke by a Army Colonel, Mark Vande Hei, who's currently on the space station. And so assuming he comes home when it's planned, he will beat me by a week or 2.
Records are meant to be broken.
Exactly.
As we say. Progress.
Yeah, if we never broke any records, right, we'd never be getting better at anything.
No, including landing on the boat.
Yeah.
So what did it feel like when you got home? You mentioned your heart mass got changed. Bone density changed. What I mean, you've been without gravity for a year basically, and then you get back and did this crush of newtons on you, or what did that feel like? And what are the ongoing health concerns you might
Yeah.
have?
Gravity, after being without it for a while, gives you kind of a beat down, gets your attention. We evolved in gravity. Our bodies don't like not having it. Our, cardiovascular system was designed to pump blood to the upper parts of our body from our legs, where gravity is trying to push it. And we need to keep it up here for our brain, our hearts, our vital organs. So, when you get to space, that's why you hear this term big headed astronaut. That's not just about ego. That's about your head actually swells up because now you have more fluid uh, distributed by your cardiovascular system than you really need. You get rid of some of that. But still, at least for me, my head was always swollen to some extent. I think most people are the same way. There's effects of radiation on board. There's the, microgravity affects our bones. If, our physiology is very smart. When our bodies realize that the skeleton is no longer necessary to support our weight, starts to get rid of it. So you basically pee out a bunch of calcium, lose bone mass, muscle mass, radiation effects on our microbiome. And, people realize now that our microbiome is, we learn more and more about it, how important it is to our overall health. And our microbiome is all this bacteria that lives in our gut that is not us. There's actually more of them, those cells, than there are our own cells that live inside of us, and that's affected. And so when you come back, you have, and it depends on the person. I mean, everyone's different based on, different variables and duration of flight. But when I got back, I was, my muscles and joints were sore and stiff. I lost, some bone mass, not that much, because we do a lot of exercise, but I did lose 25% of my heart mass that, eventually recovered. When I would stand up, I could feel all the blood rushing out of my head and down to my ankles. And, my ankles would swell up like, water balloons. You could just see them. And I'm thinking, man, this is not good. I had like hives and rashes anywhere my skin had any pressure on it, because really had not touched anything in a long time. It was almost like an allergic reaction. I was nauseous. I was dizzy, tired. So you lose a lot of your blood volume because you get rid of it. Your body realizes you don't need it. When you get back, you get that volume back pretty quick. But like someone who donates blood, you don't get the red blood cells back. So you're tired for a few months. And psychological effects of being in such an intense environment for so long that is very tightly controlled, and then not having that anymore, you feel a little bit aimless. There's effects on your vision. My visual acuity is different than my brother's. He has the traditional, you had good vision. You had the fighter pilot eyes as a kid, which means, or a young person, which means you're going to wear glasses, readers eventually. But I also need this distance correction as well. I have what's called the choroidal folds on my retina. Our choroid is the fleshy part on the back of our retina that feeds the retina basically with nutrients. So has these folds in it. And the concern is, over time that could become, cause maybe blind spots or something. So far, so good. The effects of radiation, on the space station, we get anywhere from 10 to 20 chest x-rays equivalent of radiation every single day. So that has effects on our genes. Genetic expression changes while you're in space. Hopefully, not for the bad. Genes are like DNA, RNA, protein. The expression is like a switch. You turn it on, you turn it off. What does that do to your health and your physiology? My telomeres got better. The telomeres are ends of our chromosomes that, as we age, they get shorter and more frayed. It's kind of like caps on them, which is basically an indication of our physical age. So the hypothesis, one of the experiments with my brother and I, is they were going to look at our telomeres, and what we thought would happen is his would be better than mine, but mine actually got better than his. at first we thought this was due to all the exercise I did, maybe the diet, very controlled. But about 6 months after I got home, NASA learned that the Japanese had a telomere experiment on these worms, and the same exact thing happened to their telomeres too. And I never once saw those guys running on the treadmill or working out on the weight machine. So we realized there was more to it. And I think it's a certain amount of radiation and it can be good for you. And I think that like stimulated the telomeres to get better for whatever reason. And there's one last thing that is really good that happens to you when you're in space. And it's when you don't use your feet for a really long time, you get these like baby feet. And, after my first long duration flight, when no one knew I was up there, a few days later, I go to one of these, massage places and to get a massage. And, at the end of the massage, they sometimes rub your feet. This woman says to me, she goes, "You have the softest feet I've ever felt in my entire life." And all I said to her was, "Thank you. I'm really proud of them." And then I just left. She's probably still talking about that bald guy with those really soft feet.
Amazing
like
baby
12 years
feet.
Later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I recommend that everybody read your book for more details, Endurance. I'm very proud of your accomplishments. I'm proud to say that we flew together back in the day. Thanks for taking the time with us here on the channel today. Please pass our best to Amico, and hopefully we can see you guys here on the East Coast again very soon.
Thanks, Ward. Great to be here with you.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode. If you're a first-time viewer, please ring the bell and become a subscriber so you don't miss anything. Give me the likes and comment. Check the links below for merch, including Where to Get the Punks trilogy, my first 3 novels about life in an F-14 squadron, now available for the first time as a Kindle. So check it out at Amazon. If you'd like to help support the channel, please consider using the super thanks, the heart icon below, or become a patron at patreon.com/WardCarroll. In the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again soon.
I got the cash in the bag, stadium packed. Born a rock star in this life, gonna live it up on the attack. Baby, I'm back.